Welcome to the Second Renaissance podcast. Artists, activists, contemplatives, and visionaries forging pathways through the meta-crisis to a second renaissance and a wiser, weller world.
So welcome to the Life Itself Second Renaissance podcast. Today with me, Rufus Pollock, and our guest, Jim Rutt. Jim is a distinguished fellow at SFI, the Santa Fe Institute, and a chairman of the California Institute for Machine Consciousness, and the host of the Jim Rutt Show podcast. And he's also been the past president, co-founder of the MIT Free Speech Alliance. He was the executive producer of the film Initiation to Game B, as well as the one of the co-founders of the Game B movement, and is working on a Game B book. And he has also been the past chairman of the Santa Fe Institute and the CEO of Network Solutions, which operated the .com, .net, and .org domain namespaces to its acquisition by VeriSign back in 2000. Jim was also the first CTO of Thomson Reuters. I'm delighted to have you on the show today, Jim. Really big welcome.
Yeah, great to be here, Rufus, to continue our conversations.
Yes. Well, I wanted to start, one of the things I'm often interested in, we're often interested in here at Life Itself on this podcast, is how people kind of got here. What led them to be interested in this space, in this area, in these topics? And so I wanted to start by asking you, what was your journey? In your starting maybe just with your childhood, was it like an ordinary childhood? Was it unusual? What did you went to university? How did you end up in this interest in complexity, in technology, in Game B, and shifting the paradigm? Yeah, where did that begin?
Relatively ordinary. I was I guess you'd describe it at the line between upper working class and lower middle class, just a neighborhood, a community of, plumbers, electricians, minor civil servants. My dad was a cop, which was a fairly common job, some school teachers. So nothing fancy, but none of us ever starved either. It was in the Washington, D.C. suburbs during the boom times in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So it was a very stable, very ordinary, non-affluent, non-fancy background. But we had good schools, and I did pretty well in school and was always interested in science and did enough math to be able to do the science. It was funny, I was never driven by the math, but I was always driven to learn the math to do the science, which was kind of interesting. I was fortunate enough to score well on my SAT scores, better than my high school grades, and was able to go to MIT, where I continued my learnings about advanced thinking of various sorts. Graduated, but it was I would say a disaffected youth by the time I graduated as an undergraduate. Did not go on a single job interview. Basically went back to my hometown, hung out, partied like a MFer, right? Got a job as a car salesman, paid off all my student loans, and then took off on a year-long hitchhiking trip around the country. And
when was this? Just to ask, this is the early 70s.
Yeah, mid-70s. Right? I graduated in 75, worked for a year, and then took off June of 76 on my second big hitchhiking journey. I actually logged 50,000 miles hitchhiking over the years. And
what you said you got disaffected? I just want to ask about that. You said you go to MIT, which is probably a reasonably big deal. I mean, it's for the high school. You're there.
Nobody had ever gone to MIT before from my high school.
Right. Okay. So it's kind of a fairly, European. You've gone there, and I guess you're saying you're studying, I don't know, science or engineering, or what were you majoring in?
Well, I started out in physics, and it's strange. I had literally an epiphany, and as a radical atheist, I use epiphany just for giggles. But walking down the Great Hall at MIT, and I had this voice from the sky saying, "You don't want to spend your adult life in a white coat in a damp basement." Those were literally the words that I heard. And I was on track to be an experimental physicist. I was quite good at that. My math wasn't quite sharp enough to be a theoretical physicist. And I just decided no. And from that point on, I just kind of fumbled my way through, had changed majors a few times, ended up with a kind of courtesy degree from the business school where you could, take 5 business courses and come up with some coherent story why some civil engineering, some literature, some physics, and some math made sense as a degree. So I got a degree. But I was like, I'm not going to graduate school. I have no interest in working in corporate America. The people that seem to want to go to be doobies in corporate America are kind of like the most boring dildos imaginable. And so I just said, I'll just go home to my hometown, see what up, basically. And so that's what I did.
But it's interesting. You had this moment where you suddenly saw your kind of future path. You had kind of a moment of standing back. In this case, the voice in the sky, and you're like, okay, this is not the path, the default path that I'm on, what I want. And you didn't know. You were in this unknowing. So you go home, you go hitchhiking. What happens? Yeah, this is 76. You go hitchhiking. What happens?
Lots of adventures, lots of adventures, the height of the sexual revolution before the bad STDs, it was good.
Yeah.
I ended up spending the winter in a ski town in the Rocky Mountains, working as the night shift clerk at the convenience food store, so I could ski 4 days a week on the Chamber of Commerce pass, and which was there for employees. Couldn't afford the fancy ski lifts, but you could buy $100 pass for the whole season if you worked in a local business. So I did that, just did that, and then I said, all right, time to go home, time to figure out what the world looks like. So I bought a crapper car for $600 and drove it across the United States back to my hometown. And fortunately, the girl that I had started dating right before I left was still available. We fell back into it, and we're still married. 48 years later, or whatever the hell it is since then, which was the best decision I ever made in my life. And glad she waited for me. And I decided, well, I guess I need a job, damn. And so I kind of looked around what might be some jobs that I could have that weren't belly of the beast jobs, but had some interest factor. And somehow I discovered college textbook sales. And so I went on a couple interviews to become a sales guy for college textbooks, and got 2 offers, picked the one I liked the better, and then moved off to Kentucky in the center of the United States to be the local man for Wadsworth Publishing in Eastern Kentucky, Eastern Tennessee, and Western West Virginia. So, this is, for those of you who don't know the U.S., this is Appalachia, pure and simple, pretty much, except for the town I live in, which is Lexington, which is right on the western fringe of Appalachia in the bluegrass region. So it was actually pretty nice. But so I did that and basically went around and talked to college professors all day. And my technique was to talk about what they're interested in. So I'd have 15, 20-minute, half an hour, probably half an hour, 40-minute conversations with these, interesting college professors about everything from English to history to math to physics to civil engineering, et cetera. And as I described it later, it was kind of like having a PhD that was a mile wide and an inch deep. You learned a little bit about all kinds of stuff. And meantime, said, oh, yeah, we got this new book, got that new book. This might fit your course. Tell me how you teach your course, blah, blah. And once you got good at it, it was a pretty easy job. You didn't bust your butt too hard. It took a year to really understand the mechanics and your territory and the people and the courses. But once you were there, it was probably about a half-time job, maybe a little more. So it gave me plenty of time to pursue my own interests and all that. And then this is what the pivotal thing. And again, this is an interesting story. I'm always just sort of out there, looking, right? And then I see something and I hit it, right? And so what did I start seeing in the late 70s? But these boxes on professors' desks. And I go, what the hell is that thing? Right? And they go, oh, that's a personal computer. So things like North Stars and MITs and IMSI. These were pre the packaged ones. They typically came in quasi kits, and the guys would have to put them together. And they were like 2 foot wide, 18 inches deep. They're big, right? And so they told me about them. I started researching them, and I go, wow, that's interesting. And I had done some computer stuff when I was in college, but I did not like it at all because it was, again, the big bureaucracy, the big IBM mainframes in the glass room with all these rules and stuff. And I go, damn, that ain't me, man. I don't like that. But personal computer, your own, do what you want. That's interesting. So in 1980, I took 90% of my net worth, which was $4,000, and bought a top-of-the-line Apple II, and just took off writing programs of all sorts, and just loved it, and looked to leverage my experience in the college textbook business, where I was on track to become a editor, to have my own series of textbooks and all this stuff. But I had convinced them to let me do it in educational software, but they were just too slow. And so I looked for other opportunities in educational software. I got 3 offers, but then I also had stumbled into the world's first online service called The Source. Believe it or not, most of what we have on the web today, we had in The Source in 1980. Text mode only, 1,200 baud modems, if you were lucky. Some of our customers had 300 baud modems, which was unbelievably slow. Very expensive, about $8 or $10 an hour in 1980 dollars, which would be worth about $3.50 each. So $8 an hour is like $25 an hour. Can you imagine 1,200 baud text mode only internet at $25 an hour? That's what we were selling, but we could sell it because it was the only thing like it on earth. You wanted email? We were the only way to do it. The world's first Catholic confession online was done on The Source. So anyway, I wrote them a crazed letter and said, I could build you a $4 billion business in educational online, blah, blah, blah. And they said, And so I happened to be back near where they were for Thanksgiving. My parents lived there in D.C., where this place was. We interviewed, liked each other. They offered me a job. And I first took a job as their regional sales manager for the Midwest. Did that for 6 months, but with the intent to come in-house when the first good job was available. And so I became the head of market research. Then I was in marketing for a while. Then I ran the application software development, even though I was not really a programmer other than a self-taught one. And then I came back to be essentially co-head of product management for The Source. We built all kinds of cool things. I personally designed the emails, the second generation email system, second generation bulletin board system. I was co-product manager on something called Participate, which was probably one of the first precursors to social media. I personally invented something called user publishing, which was the origin of blogging. So I had all kinds of fun in those days, but the company was a disaster for all kinds of reasons. It was owned by the Reader's Digest, which was this very stodgy publishing company. And the executives were totally misfit for the nature of the market. And in 20 months I was there, we had 5 presidents. And the last one was just intolerable. And I, as part of my role as product manager, I spent a couple of months writing up our product strategy for the coming years. And I presented it to this guy, and this was my product strategy. This company was a mix of online communications and online information services. And I had done lots of analysis and showed that the information services were all big losers. The communication services were all big winners. Our number one competitor, and we had one at that point, was CompuServe, and they had taken a step ahead of us in the communications infrastructure. And I identified that we should be about 80% of our investments in communications interaction and only 20% on content, and just enough content to serve as bait. Basically, news wires and stock prices is basically all we needed. And I presented this to them, this haughty guy who went on to be I think he ended up as the head guy at Reader's Digest one day. We are a content company, sir. Content will always be king, blah, blah. And I said to myself as I walked out the door, I'm out of here. This guy's a fucking fool. Yet another idiot. And so within 3 months, I had hooked up with another guy, moved to Boston, and started our own company to essentially use the low-cost technologies that we had developed at The Source to build systems for business customers, Wall Street and large corporations. And we built a series of products. They were pretty successful. We spun up another company that did an aligned series of products with a slightly different market focus. And then we sold both of those companies and 2 other companies, one of which we had an investment in 1986. And I retired for the first time, barely, right? One of the things that, you asked the journey, how did I happen to be able to take this weird journey, is my wife and I have never had fancy tastes, right? We never, wanted fancy cars or big houses or, for our engagement, my engagement present to her was some camping equipment, stuff like that. So never into the fancy shit, which I always tell young people, don't get into the fancy shit. Because if you're into the fancy shit, the world's got you by the balls, right? If you're not into the fancy shit, you can tell people to go fuck off anytime you want. And that's hugely empowering. So I retired for 2 days, got sucked back into the game 2.5 days in, helped a friend of mine start what eventually became T-Mobile. And that was kind of cool. I never joined the company, but I was an advisor on and off for a couple of years. It was fun. And I did another startup, which it was okay. We sold it, kind of broke even on that one. I did another little startup, which was very successful, sold that. It's specifically designed to be a one-person company, a precursor to some of the things that are happening today. And then by chance, I went to work for 3 days as a consultant to Thomson Reuters, then Thomson, now Thomson Reuters. And I basically was in there to diagnose some problems they had at one of their business units. And my my report was pretty dire. And they said, well, would you like to come on for 2 months to help us fix it? And I quoted them a crazy price. And they said, okay. And I said, well, I guess I'll have to do it then. So I did that. And then they offered me a position. And again, I quoted a fairly ridiculous price. And they said, okay. And so I went to work in the belly of the beast for the first time. Right. And in kind of a middle executive level, I was COO for 6 business units that together were maybe 50 million in revenue, maybe a little bit more. And I agreed to do it for 2 years. And then actually had some fun doing that, some great people, some wonderful products, but ones that were all getting long in the tooth. And this was 1992 now, right? So the internet was just a thing, but not yet really used for business purposes very much. And through one thing or another, we were able to drag our companies and our products into the internet faster than the other guys. And in 1994, my 2 years were just about up. I had actually accepted an offer to join as president essentially AI company that did AI products for the insurance industry. But by, again, coincidence, exactly at that moment, the Thomson Reuters board had a meeting where they realized, oh shit, we have to have an internet strategy. We don't have one. And somehow my name came up as the most likely guy to be able to lead one. And so even though I had submitted my resignation, the resignation was kind of going up the stack. At the same time, a very, very senior executive was coming down the stack trying to find where the hell I was so they could have a conversation with me. And so they offered me the job essentially as lead pilot for the transition of the company to the internet. And I go, shit, that's pretty good. And I, again, demanded a ridiculous pay package and all that. It's kind of fun. And had to tell the other guys, sorry, you can't beat this deal. And they understood. So that was all cool. I made friends with them. So I helped drag Thomson onto the internet from 92 to 99, basically. And sure enough, we did it. We, as I always say, it's like the hikers, one of them's putting on his running shoes, and the other hiker says, why don't you put on your running shoes? And the guy said, well, this is grizzly bear country. And the guy with the hiking boots says, well, you can't outrun a grizzly bear. And the guy with the running shoes says, I don't got to outrun the grizzly bear. I just got to outrun you. Right. So all we had to do was do our transition to the internet faster than our fairly staid and stolid competitors, which we did. We went from number 4 to number 1 in diversified professional publishing, basically because we made the technology transfer about 18 months faster. And but during all this, here I am, a fancy corporate executive. By the end, I was officially the CTO. I was a member of the executive committee. I was even on the depth charts at the bottom, like the 4th guy or 5th guy to be the next CEO of Thomson, scarily enough, which would have been a very terrible decision on their part. But but nonetheless, I was a pretty big fish at that point. But I had continued my disillusionment with the whole thing, right? And in 1994, I had gotten connected with a bunch of sustainability people in an online community, private online community. And I learned a whole lot about the fact that we were living in a fundamentally non-sustainable game, right? And these are some serious thinkers. And at that point, I can literally remember the day when I said, this whole thing is basically fucked, right? I didn't quite have the vocabulary for it or the knowledge, but it was just like the light came on that this game is bad, this game is corrupt, it can't last, it's going to fall, it's destroying, it's corrupting, not destroying, it's corrupting human nature substantially through the fact that what was a useful thing, the market, and which was a useful thing, finance, had become a monster. And the thing that turned it into a monster was advertising and the ability to psychologically invent needs and manipulate people. Because when the market is provisioning the needs of the people, it's one thing. But when it's programming the people to need things it could then sell them to, it has passed some line of goodness and become fundamentally corrupt. And of course, 1994 was pretty early to see that, because it has gotten a lot worse since then. And so here I am working in the belly of the beast, working really hard. Whenever I do a job, I work hard at it. And I hired great people. That was probably the other most important thing I did at Thomson. Brought in an amazing number of good people. And then in 99, out of the blue, I got an offer to interview to be CEO of Network Solutions, which was at the time ran the domain name system for the world, basically, an evil monopolist, ill-run, badly run, and frankly, I only agreed because their office was about a 5-minute drive from my office, and they offered me a free lunch. So I go, sure, what the hell? I'll go talk to somebody for a free lunch. And but I just kept coming back and back. I went through 9 rounds of interviews, and they finally offered me the job. And I said, okay, whatever, this will be fun. And did that. The company was indeed screwed up, and just like Rutt's rule of real estate, no matter how many times you look at an old house, if you actually end up buying it, it'll be worse than you thought. And Network Solutions was worse than I thought, but I convened, again, hired great people, a lot of them from the Rutt Alumni Association. And we got that place humming and fixed our outstanding problems, got our biggest operational problems on the way to being fixed, at least. And this was right during the peak of the internet bubble. And we went out and raised $2 billion for the company. Then the price stock, it was a publicly traded company. The price kept going up after all that. And I go, damn, the price we raised that $2 billion for, I could barely justify, but we get 50% above that. I go, this is crazy. And so I called 3 investment bankers I knew and said, I do not have permission from the board to do this, but if you can find me a buyer at this price or higher, we'll pay you a $50 million fee. And so the bankers started calling around and found lots of interest. So I convened a board meeting and said, hey, guys, I'm going to tell you something I just did. And they go, oh, you're not supposed to do that, blah, blah, blah. But we approve it retroactively. So the company then was in play. And then about 2 months later, we sold it for a ridiculous amount at the very top of the dot-com bubble. And that was good. And we actually got the deal closed. It came down a little bit from the top, not much. Got the deal closed in 3 months, which was also a lot of hard work. And at that point, I said, all right, I'm going to, I've had enough of business. It's fun, but I don't know, it just doesn't interest me anymore. And because I had this coup, we basically we increased the stock value by a factor of 750% in 1 year, basically. And so that got a lot of people's attention. They wanted me to be their CEO I got calls. Hey, you want to run Yahoo? You want to run Autodesk? Blah, 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 much bigger companies. And I go, nah, not interested. And so I said, I'm going to go back to my roots in science. And I had discovered along the way complexity science. And that I think I can pull up the date from my Amazon logs. I believe it was 1997. I read a 1-paragraph review of John Holland's book on genetic algorithms in Scientific American. And I go, what the hell's genetic algorithms? And I did a little research. And I said, this sounds really interesting. So I ordered the book and I read it and I became immediately hooked into this new lens of thinking about the world. And I read every book I could find. I read Stuart Kaufman's Origins of Order. I read Melanie Mitchell's book on genetic algorithms and on those other things that Wolfram does. But anyway, the cellular automata, and started reading scientific papers, and I've become a fanatic on complexity science. And I was actually applying it in Thomson. I developed a framework for mergers and acquisitions, which I was able to barely translate into language that executives can understand, and basically just said, if we think about our world of business, it's coevolutionary fitness landscapes. And companies that are doing good have pretty steep fitness landscapes, and their landscape is rising. The hill they're on is rising. However, the nature of bureaucracy is such that all it's good at is climbing to the top of the hill and entrenching. Now, the problem you have is fitness landscapes are coevolutionary. So some peaks in a landscape are moving down. And for instance, we own $2 billion worth of newspapers. And my argument was, that's a mountain that's going down, people. We should sell it. And we did right at the peak, which was really good. And I developed a quite elaborate vocabulary about ridges and peaks. And if you're going to do an attack through the valley of death, you better make sure you're extremely well funded, but you're better to go along a ridge that connects two things. You can do a parachute attack by buying a small hill near the big hill that you want, and then reinforce it with lots of money, and then attack the big hill. So I was able to come up with some very nice metaphors and analogies from complexity science that were actually useful in our merger and acquisitions work. And Thomson probably bought 50 to 80 companies a year in those days, mostly small ones, but occasionally a really big one. And this framework, while not the thing that drove our strategy, was something that the company took pretty seriously. So anyway, when I did decide in 2001 that, in fact, the first time I retired lasted 2 days. I forgot to mention the other time I retired in the middle of that when I sold my little teeny company. I retired for 2 months before I went into Thomson. And this time I said, got to have an interest that lasts me at least 2 years. And I said, complexity and particularly evolutionary computing, letting computers programs evolve themselves. And it might have come from, managing 5,000 techies at Thomson. I go, wouldn't it be nice to have software without techies? That'd be great, right? And so the day I finished at Network Solutions, I opened up my lab at my house and had a bunch of computers and started writing evolutionary neural nets to design evolve game playing agents. And a guy I know who's a writer for the New York Times thought this was interesting. Wrote a story about Internet CEOs doing what? Right? And the story says, the first time I saw that my totally evolved players could get significantly better without any human input, the hair on the back of my neck rose up, which it did. And essentially a precursor to things like AlphaGo and such.
Yes.
And so anyway, I was just on my own doing research. I was loosely affiliated with George Mason University. They had a very good group at the Krasnow Institute, which I go down to once a week. If I need help from somebody, I'd send them an email. But then someone at the Santa Fe Institute read this story in the New York Times and said, this guy sounds like our kind of guy. And they called me up and harangued me for an hour and asked me if I'd come out and visit. And I said, let me tell you, I'm a complete rookie at this stuff. It's like asking a barefoot friar in Guatemala to come to the Vatican. But if you insist, I'll be happy to come out. And so I did. And we hit it off real well. And they offered me a position there as a research fellow. And for family reasons, it made a lot of sense for our whole family to move out there for a year, which was the plan. Ended up staying 10 years and did research for about 2.5, continue to do research, but at a lower level. And again, these decisions you make for God knows what reasons, they wanted me to get involved in helping them run the place on the board of trustees and then the executive committee and then vice chairman and chairman. And I let that happen. And sometimes I wonder, should I? But truth is, I'm probably a better executive than I was a scientist. So did that for 10 years. And then in 2012, again, for family reasons, we moved back to Virginia. I remained.
One question. I just got a question. Going back, you said you had this epiphany in the mid-90s about sustainability. But how did that impact? Because then you stayed at Thomson, you took over Network Solutions. What role did that play versus just your interests? Because it sounds like obviously you have many wonderful interests that engage you.
Well, I didn't do anything about it. I never did anything.
It was sitting there then. This kind of insight that the system was somehow broken.
Yeah, and it was part of my base operating system, right? And I would talk to people about it, and the system.
What would they say? What would other executives say if you talk to people inside of the system, inside of the belly of the beast?
I would not talk to those people about this. They thought I was nuts anyway, so because I was very heterodox and did things like deer hunting and, drove a beat up pickup truck and lived in a small house and all those things. They thought I was a suspicious character anyway. But so I didn't talk to them about stuff like that. But I did talk to people at Santa Fe Institute. They were quite interested. And I didn't know where my interests were settled until about 2007 or 8. I got the insight that the inner engine of the badness comes from our monetary system and the couplings of our monetary system to finance, and then the couplings of finance to our businesses. And so I went on I guess it would be a 4 or 5 year journey. Maybe it's 2006, somewhere around that. I refocused finally using my complexity lens now, started thinking about money and finance and business, all as coupled systems, right? But what's the inner one is the money on money return drive. And that was sort of built some models for myself. And then I started researching the history of money and alternatives, ran into David Graeber's great book, Debt, the First 5,000 Years. You're interested in this stuff? Yeah. Which, by the way, check out my my condensation of everything I know about money called Dividend Money on YouTube. It basically is a result of all my studies in money. And
so what was the result of your study? Just say a little bit about that from it. What was we could go watch it. I'll put the link in if I can, the comment in the podcast notes, but just tell us a little bit, what was your conclusion in a few minutes from that examination?
Well, first and foremost, money should be a commons for the people, not a way to make money for banks or governments even, and that new money should enter the system by being paid out as a dividend to the citizens, right? And so that you'd get a medium-sized UBI each year, a couple $3,000 a year maybe, as the new money enters the system each year, as the monetary supply grows, but the monetary supply should grow in congruence with GDP, maybe a little faster, but not a lot, to get the government out of the fiat money business of just printing money and running up the big debts that we had, right? And since 2008, it's gone nuts. I mean, the debt in 2008 was relatively modest in the advanced Western countries compared to what it is now. And I said, this is a disaster. This can't keep working. And it is a disaster. And it is going to fuck us, people, by the way, right? But if they
tell us, so what do you think will happen? You mean basically there will be some kind of inflationary collapse, or what do you see?
Well, I think there's multiple things. One, there could be hyperinflation. There could be a repudiation of the debt. There could be a redemption of the debt with financial trickery. In the U.S. in particular, there's a trick called the $1 trillion coin, which the Federal Reserve has control of the paper money, but they don't have control of coinage. The Congress has control of coinage. And so Congress could vote to issue $35 trillion coins, give them to the executive, to the Treasury, and say, redeem all of our federal debt with these $1 trillion coins. I've done some simulations on that. My guess is that you'd get a 4x inflation from that, but maybe not. So there's a number of endgame plays, and whether we have an administration with sufficient smarts to figure out a good end game strategy, or it just unfolds in a chaotic way, that's going to tell a lot about what the transition looks like. We could survive a 4x inflation, by the way. It would produce all kinds of weird effects and changes of relative status of various industries and people. But the other side of it, things would probably be fine. On the other hand, if the thing just gradually falls apart, we end up in hyperinflation and all that, that's a good way to end up with fascism, essentially. That's what happened to Germany. And so, managing this unfolding of the intolerable debt regime and the intolerably undisciplined governments is going to be very, very interesting. And you don't know when. That's the interesting thing you learn from complex systems is very unstable systems can last a long time, right? Particularly especially if they're adaptive. And our system, don't forget, game A is smart. It is adaptive.
Yes. To be a stable system, it is techno-capitalism is evolving. And I just want to say, I think, just wanted to come in very quickly. I think it's a great point you're making, and I often talk about earthquakes and volcanoes. So having the insight of tectonic plates gave us huge and a huge and simple intuitive insight into where earthquakes will happen or where volcanoes will happen, but not when.
Yeah,
As you say,
with earthquakes, you can give a statistical ensemble. You can describe
yes,
what the distribution will look like over time. You can't say a goddamn thing about which earthquake will happen when.
yes.
We've gotten a little better now, but still not good.
And
And that's what.
that's true about cultural paradigmatic earthquakes or cultural or societal earthquakes. We can now have a good sense that something is going on with the existing socio-cultural paradigm or system that we're in, that at some point there will be a significant breakdown. That's what the sustainability stuff tells us, exponential growth on a finite planet, and when is hard.
And that's the most important thing I learned from my complexity journey is epistemic humility. The reality is the universe is extremely high dimensional, and the social universe is even higher dimensional in some ways because
Yes.
it's agentic, right? Hydrogen atoms don't scheme against each other. Animals scheme against each other. Humans scheme against each other, in a much deeper way than animals do. And so the complexity of our social systems are immensely high dimensional, and all you can say is probably something big will happen at some time in the future, but what and when, you'd be a fool to make a sharp bet on that. And I will say that in the social change world, I am often considered kind of this voice of, I don't know what reason isn't the right word, but they all think the world's about to end. And I go, no, it ain't about that. It might. I'd always say, give
Yes.
them the complex systems. It might happen tomorrow afternoon. Here's how it could happen tomorrow afternoon. But it might stumble along for 25 years. Here's how it could stumble along
Yes.
for 25 years. And so you have to plan. When you talk about planning for discontinuity in the future, consider a substantial ensemble of trajectories and have your
Yes.
strategy essentially cover as many of those trajectories as you can practically cover. Because if you bet on any one, you're almost certainly going to be wrong.
I think it's a great point, and I think it's also why my two great loves were like history and mathematics, which I actually think are very related. And one is like the patterning of the natural world, and history actually for me, I mean, you could say that I then became an economist, but the social sciences, but particularly I think history does justice to the richness of the social world and the patterning. Of course, there's anthropology and all the other disciplines. Why I'm saying that, and why the project we've kind of engaged at the moment most with like the second Renaissance, why we picked that term, is because historical analogies are informative. And there's this kind of, I like to say, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, as that maybe misquote of Mark Twain goes. So in particular, like I like to think if you thought back and you're there in 1100 and we had the kind of level complexity science today, we'd be like, well, the Catholic Church really is becoming corrupt and diseased, and the way that we might look at some aspects of the current system in that way, it's like it's not working so well, or the late Roman Empire. But we'd look at the Catholic Church and say, look, it's not working, the Pope's becoming corrupt. And yet it stumbled. There were many people saying, trying even Protestantism for kind of a couple of hundred years before it actually took off.
And then the Catholic Church is still here, still bigger than Protestantism, and is growing faster than Protestantism. Protestantism is down to like a quarter of the size of Catholicism now, I believe.
Right, but you should conclude the successes of it, which is the secular world of modernity, because Protestantism represented modernity. But I think modernity certainly outcompeted Catholicism in terms of its influence or the leading edge of society. But my point to come back was, you could have predicted for several hundred years that there was a serious problem. Right. But in fact, the Catholic Church fights off several Protestant attempts or reformist attempts, and it's then, we have Luther, which is quite unexpected. It's like partly because the German princes happen to support him for various, probably basically political reasons that have nothing to do with their religious inclination.
So in the 30 Years' War, they fought themselves to a draw, essentially. And yes. the peace of Westphalia is still one of the fundamental basis of Game A, 350 years later, right? The nation state. There was no such thing as the nation state. There was a few examples of nation states, not many. England was one. But mostly there were bizarre hodgepodges of principalities and dukedoms and overlapping hierarchies. It was not Germany had hundreds of sovereignties of various sorts. And the Westphalian state is one of the four I consider foundations of Game A, and may well have been a change for the better, as much of Game A was. I do believe that Game A in
Yes.
1700, when it came together, was a very substantial improvement over theocracy and feudalism, which were basically the two predecessors. So when
Exactly.
so as much as Marx admired capitalism for its progress, I always say that Game A was probably about as
Yes.
good a compounding as we could have gotten in 1700, where we basically combined the Westphalian state, modern real science. For the first time, we kicked religion and metaphysics out of science. There's a minimal metaphysics, but like Aristotle's complete weird blend of metaphysics and science. Democracy, starting in Netherlands and then in England with the Glorious Revolution of 1688, and then modern finance with the Bank of Amsterdam, and then ratcheted up a level in July of 1694 with the founding of the Bank of England. Those four things came together in a half a century, right? And that was the inheritance from which Game A emerged around 1700.
Exactly, and I think it's a good point. I mean, here it's one of the nuances, but just as I would say, like the rise of the Christian church out of the ashes of the Roman Empire, you could say, was like at the point a new paradigm comes into being, it's offering solutions and things to the previous paradigm's deficiencies. But then in its decay phase, obviously, it's problematic. So maybe this brings me to then Game B. Coming back to your story, you were saying around 2006, you really start to see these kind of sources and the financial system as a kind of driver of the unsustainability of the deep problems, systemic problems that there are. And you were then saying about like kind of fiat money, and then you were saying there was kind of conclusion of that, but you were starting to see, I was just wondering if you want to kind of continue that story, because I guess
let's continue that story.
Start of Game B.
Yeah, that bridges to the start of Game B, actually. And at the same time, fortunately, at the Santa Fe Institute, there were some very serious sustainability, ecology-minded physicists, economists, et cetera. And we were one of the first groups to really study the science of climate change remediation. And still some of the SFI alums like Doan Farmer, Jessica Tranzik, some others, who's the guy at Harvard? Anyway, his name will come up. He's an external faculty, been very influential in trying to figure out the math of how best to do climate remediation without, destroying the economy. And so I was exposed to that thinking and participated in it. It helped because I was always the practical guy. They'd have their grand theories, like, it ain't going to work because of this, this, and this, right, in the real world. And they go, oh, okay, I think you're right, right? Sometimes they say, right, sometimes not. But anyway, I was continually saturated, and for probably more than I ever was in the business world, in sustainability issues, technological evolution, learning curves, et cetera, while I was independently doing the dive into finance. And there was one other person at SFI that was very interested in this, and he and I would talk quite a bit, and he helped me work through the math a fair bit. And then, I don't know, it must have been around 2008. We had a new trustee join the Santa Fe Institute, very young guy, younger than most of our trustees, a guy named Jordan Greenhall at the time. And we kind of sat next to each other at lunch and had a kind of interesting conversation. And then after that first trustee meeting he was at, he and I decided, let's go have a chat. And we went down to one of the little meeting pods at the Santa Fe Institute up on the mountain. And we had a 4-hour insanely deep conversation. If comic books have an origin story, the Game B origin story is that conversation. You can follow the rest of the Game B story from that point. And we didn't solve anything. We didn't declare any manifesto, but we both realized that we had seen the same thing, and we were able to reduce the diagnosis to a simple sentence, which is, if doing the right thing is the wrong thing, there's something fundamentally wrong with the system. And we had retracked our business careers on how, when I first got into business in 1975, there were still a lot of things that were profitable that people wouldn't do because they were wrong, right? Nobody would have put pornography on the source in 1980. I can guarantee you that, right? The idea was just unthinkable. No respectable person would put pornography up for the public to consume in 1980. Unthinkable. Gangster rap would have been unthinkable in 1980, right? There's lots of things that would have been unthinkable in 1980. But by the time you got to 1994, when Jordan entered the workforce, he's almost a full generation younger than I am, almost exactly. He said, "Oh yeah, by that time," and I agree with him. In most places, Thomson being a good exception, it was a very honorable company. It was family owned, or at least family controlled, and very ethical. But by 94, the ethos was, if it's arguably legal and profitable, you must do it, right? And then by 2008 or 9, when we had this conversation, people like Facebook and Uber and, or those, I don't know if they were around yet, but yeah, Facebook was. The ethos was, not only was it arguably legal, but if you are caught, is the penalty for doing it less than the gain, right? You look at companies like Google and Facebook, they've been fined billions and billions of dollars for doing all kinds of scurvy shit. And yet they keep doing it. And why is that? Because they get fined $2 billion, but they made $5 billion. So of course they do it. And that is the ethos of our business. They're totally rotten, right? If you try to compete with them doing things the right way, you will be crushed because rottenness works. And unless you have social
bad money drives out good. That's Gresham's.
And in fact, the stronger statement of it's Daniel Schmachtenberger's multipolar trap, which is if you're in a highly competitive dynamic and one player makes a move towards the bad, which is financially good, everybody else is forced to follow or gets driven out of business. And it's very similar.
It's straight prisoner's dilemma with multiple players and high incentives. Yeah,
exactly. And so this is the system that we're in. And why is that? Money on money return, which filters up from the actual money on money return to the war amongst investable assets, right? So investable assets go to where they can get the highest return. And then investable assets drive stock prices, which then drives executive compensation. So you have this multipolar trap, horizontal prisoner's dilemma, more or less. Gresham's law, but kind of turned into a different domain than money.
Yes, in a different domain. Yeah.
And that's what we're at. We're with no ethos left. Essentially, okay, maybe you shouldn't explicitly kill people by going up and putting a bullet in their head, but it's okay to kill them by chinsing on the quality of the rotors on the brakes, even though your engineers say it'll kill 50 people a year, right? That's okay as long as it's the profitable, correct financial decision to make. So we are in a completely now amoral epoch where money on money return is the arbiter of everything. And then, of course, at least in the United States, a little bit less so in Western Europe, but more so in other countries of the world, money has also hacked politics because the potential counterforce to money is politics, social solidarity. But the people have been corrupted and brainwashed and bought, and their attention span. We're now in a really bad end state with people's attention spans being diluted. TikTok, if the American people had any sense, they would go to the headquarters of TikTok with guillotines, drag those fuckers out of the offices and chop their heads off, right?
I want to ask a question here because I really agree with this. And there's the financial engine. So there's the reward function, which we could think in even of a complexity and evolutionary sense of like energy. So in a system, basically the energy is resource, which is money. The other aspect, I guess I want to ask you, which is I would also, we here would tell a story of saying it is that, but there's a level deeper, which is that there's a shift in the cultural paradigm and it takes a long time to play out. So the fact that people by the 80s start permitting it, that you have the famous greed is good speech by Gordon Gekko, that you had this idealization by ideologues, not even people who are ironically people who are probably in favor of family values, but who are also market fundamentalists, who believe that kind of unfettered competition and freedom in the market works. And these things have long roots back into modernity. It's just they take a long time to play out. I mean, the analogy I would say is like the Catholic Church in some way. the underlying thing that's driving the Catholic Church is kind of good, is that whether you respect or not, but there's real sacredness, a real dedication, a real vision. But then there gets this hierarchy that's built. There's this kind of underlying playing out of a culture around hierarchical control and an institutional structure that ultimately become deformed and destructive. And so I guess my question here is the willingness. You're saying like in 1980, there's this kind of, I remember there's always this kind of joke, which is, and you might not, but the atheists are living on the borrowed money of religion, which is there was a lag, and you already see Rockefeller. I mean, you already see in the late 19th century, if you look at what Rockefeller's doing, who's an extremely religious man. I mean, he's a serious person.
And a rapacious capitalist of the worst sort.
As a rapacious capitalist, and is already saying, well, if I can get away with it, if I can lie to the government, if I can do this, we're in a cutthroat thing. I go to the church on the Sunday, but what I do in this area is somehow distinct. And is already hiring, by the way, a market publicist. I mean, one of the smart things Rockefeller did after the lawsuit in the 1910s and 1920s was hire a publicist to make him look good. They start the Rockefeller Foundation. I'm just saying this stuff has been there in the essence of capitalism for a long time, just as the things that end up corrupting the Catholic Church by 1300, 1400 AD, in the Common Era, are there by 1000 in the Common Era. It just takes a long time to play out. So I'm just kind of wondering about, yes, there's the money system, but there's, it's like the deepest thing, for example, I would contend that's driving Facebook is not just the profit maximization. It's a story that people know what they want. They're giving people freedom of choice for the information and orienting information to the thing that they most, quote unquote, want, that they most pay attention to, which is not necessarily what they really want.
Or what they need. There may be a difference between what, because again, I recently stumbled across a classic book from the early 70s by Daniel Bell called "The Cultural Contradictions of Capitalism."
Yes,
it gets right to this, I think, which is that the disciplines necessary to actually run an honorable and good capitalist system are things like thrift and courage and honesty. And being good to your people, etc. But the conditioning that happens from late stage over the top consumerism and the soft life that comes with that does not build people who have courage. It does not build people who go to business school to run a company. You're certainly not taught honesty as a high value, right? Thrift. Look at this ridiculous. Again, why aren't the people rising up with guillotines at Bezos's $40 million wedding in Venice?
Yes,
they should have gone in there and killed them all right there with axes, right? I would have said yes to that. Right?
Yes, it's an affront to something, to a kind of decency. I guess the thing is, though, I'm just trying to get, because it's worth diagnosing the problem. The other thing is there's this guy, Edgar Schein, who was at MIT, who was the big researcher of culture, particularly in corporate culture. And I remember a story reading his work where he's advising, I think, General Foods, a very large food conglomerate in the United States, General Mills or something like that. And there's a moment when they're like, they notice that people are adding, this is like the late 70s, early 80s. And there's like, people are basically making more sugar in food. And they're like, this is not healthy food. And they're like, they look at our corporate values. Their corporate values are actually about like healthy, it isn't making necessarily money or something like that. And they go out and they start trying to market this alternative brand. They start trying to do advertising, like eat healthier. And they're like, their sales keep going down. And at some point, they have a choice in a way between, as you say, kind of an existence or compromise their values, and they compromise their values. And they make,
that's classic.
They made an effort.
That's a multipolar trap. Perfect.
Well, let's not call it let's call it prisoners. Let's call it the classic. But yes, we can call it multipolar trap. But yeah, exactly. So it's a classic prisoners and a collective action problem. The point I'm trying to say, though, how does humanity, what you just mentioned about Bell, I'm trying to get the relationship. Culture helps us solve collective action problems that were always there of a race to the bottom in our behavior. Or we can go back to the 19th century. You read the book. There's the wonderful book, I think, by Richard Evans about Hamburg and the plague, the cholera epidemic in Hamburg in the late 19th century. And one of the things I took from that book was that in the late 19th century, a major thing in most cities was food quality. You could not rely on flour not being adulterated. So what have we done? We've solved those. And one of those things is trust. And one of those things is culture. And culture is how we solve them, but we've corroded that culture. And then that culture is in turn allowed the hypercharging then capitalism and competition is a double attack. We've eaten away at the base that supports those behaviors. That means that the cost of me behaving that way as executive is so shameful in my community, I won't do it or something like that. And we've intensified the competition to climb up the fitness landscape.
Late stage game A has gotten extremely transparent and powerful, right? It used to be, the friction allowed, like for instance, small businesses to exist. The family department store was a fixture in America when I grew up in the 60s. Most of our department stores were DC area department stores. There weren't these big chains, right? But now, as IT in particular, containerization, the deunionization of trucking has reduced friction tremendously in retail. Guess what? Walmart and Target eat everybody. The same thing is happening everywhere. The intensity of competition has risen, while at the same time, I'm going to introduce a game B term here. The cultural accords have eroded, right? And we call them the accords, which is the only counterforce we've been able to find to the multipolar trap or to the game theory defection problem. For instance, the no pornography on the source in 1980, because it would be utterly shameful for anybody who was aspiring to be a leader in society to be peddling pornography to 9-year-olds, right? Today, 9-year-olds can get the most vile Romanian triple penetration pornography with some choking and S&M on their phones, right? 9 years old, what the fuck, right? That is just wrong. And but no one's willing to say it is wrong, or if they are willing to say it is wrong, they don't do anything about it. So in game B, we will have strong accords. But the interesting thing, to avoid the dictatorship trap, which is the other side, right? Let's elect Jim Rutt and Rufus Pollock, dictators of the world, and they'll fix all the problems. Yeah, and as Galadriel said in Lord of the Rings, yes, that's how it would start. Right. But we know absolute power corrupts absolutely. And even nice fellows like ourselves will likely be corrupted. And if not us, then the people that succeeded us. And so the game B hypothesis is to build the accords from the bottom up and build small communities initially with very strong sauce that may be quite different from each other, but their accords are absolutely firm, life and death. They will kill to defend them. And then, but they're not all. But there are some things that you have to cooperate at a higher level. And then you have a membrane which contains multiple lower level membranes. But the membrane only deals with things that the lower level membranes can't or shouldn't or don't want to deal with. Find a better way to do it at the higher level. And then those have their accords. And if you want to maintain the benefits of being in that mesoscale membrane, then you have to agree by the accords. And the accords can be of two sorts. This is also very important in thinking about how the architecture of game B evolves. They can be at the intermediate membrane only level, or there could be mandatory inheritable. Let me give you an example. An easy to understand intermediate level membranes. Let's imagine we have 20, we call proto-Bs, Dunbar number, 150 person communities on the ground, all of them where agriculture is one of their significant industries. And all of them do at least some organic agriculture, and they decide they want to join up in an organic agricultural co-op to help them buy agricultural supplies and to market their produce. This is classic. Agricultural co-ops exist all over the United States and still do, particularly in the upper Midwest. And so it's organic. So now there's two ways that this could be. If it's intermediate level rule only, proto-Bs that do both organic and non-organic farming can bring their organic products to the organic co-op and sell them. And they can buy, seeds, and they can buy farm equipment, and they can buy baling wire, etc. But if the rule was inheritable organic only, then only those proto-Bs who had agreed to be totally organic in their farming could be members of the membrane. And intermediate membranes can be designed either way. And it's a matter of voluntary choice how people choose to form those membranes. And there could be both kinds of membranes in parallel in the same region. And so this, again, the way to have strong accords, which are very heavily enforced. You violate the accord, you're kicked out, basically. And that can then build up higher and higher to the bioregional level, to sort of the equivalent of a state in the United States, to large land masses. But each one of these higher levels presumably is focused on narrower and narrower issues. And some of those issues only apply to the governance at that level, and others are mandatorily inheritable all the way down to the bottom of the stack. And as those things self-assemble with strong sauce at every level, yet with high plurality horizontally, we believe it's at least possible to build a society where accords can overcome the dangers of the multipolar trap. Very hard, but that's the only. I've been working on this, and not just me.
Only way. Yes, culture is key.
Has to be strong. Has to be strong sauce.
Strong
life or
sauce.
fucking death sauce. Life or fucking death sauce. You violate the accords enough, and in bad faith, you're out. If you come back, we'll kill you. Right, which is the traditional forager, the famous book, Chris Bohm's Hierarchy in the Forest. One of the best books of all time. I say I put it #1 on the Game B reading list. Somehow for 95% of our human history, we avoided exploitation by big men most of the time. And how did the forager do it? And there's always been big men. 1% of humans are sociopaths, right? And a disproportionate number of sociopaths are charismatic. And so what happens when a charismatic sociopath shows up in the forager world? People laughed at him. They ignored him. They subverted them. They exiled them, typically. You didn't kill them, but they exiled them.
No, only if they came back.
But they said if they come back, they kill you. And oh, by the way, Graeber points this out. Often the rule was the family of the guy has to do the killing, so as not to start feuds between clans. Yeah. And so that's in the accord. And if you're not willing to kill the guy when he comes back, then you too will get kicked out. And so these accords have to be strong. We don't have any. We don't have accords like that anymore. Everybody's a pussy and a coward and won't say what they think and won't enforce their views of right or wrong.
I see that. I got a question. There's a book you probably may have come across, the Narrow Corridor by Acemoglu and Robinson.
Yes, I read that quite a while ago. That's a very interesting book.
Because I think it relates this point about how the issue with this story about how that word in Gatherer Hunter is like, well, you've got this challenge of how do you grow? And particularly how do you coordinate? That's where you end up with kind of states of some kind. And in that book, obviously, there's this point, which is you're trying to balance between, if you want to use a different term, I guess we could say, the third attractor. But there's one attractor, which is basically the state becomes very strong, and you get kind of dictatorship. And the other one, though, which I think is intriguing, and is a kind of critique of sometimes what I'd call the neo-romanticism of the indigenous, which is maybe it's not even in the indigenous, but we can have simpler societies. There isn't a state, but then they have these very rigid cultural norms and taboos that are which is what at least in that book they critique. And they're saying, is there this middle way where you can have strong civil society and strong state co-evolving in this kind of optimal narrow corridor? This is to take us off. I do want to come back, because you were saying you meet Jordan Greenhall, you have this moment, and this is the kind of birth bone of game B. So can you just tell listeners right now, some of them may or may not be familiar. So we've used this term a bit on this call. I know we're coming to kind of late to ask you, but maybe we'll edit it at the beginning. But what do you mean by game A and what do you mean by game B in a and take as long as you want, but starting in a succinct way? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I will try to be succinct. Not my strongest suit. Game A, as I alluded to earlier, and this is, by the way, this is my formulation. Other people will put the starting point of Game A much earlier. But I believe that the system we live in today, which influences most of what we do, started to come together in a strong way around 1700 with the combination of the Westphalian state, real science, strong technology, science and technology together, democracy, or at least the sense that the popular will is what the government has to pretend that it's managing towards. Because even North Korea claims to be a democratic republic, which is hilarious, right? But at least they claim it, right? And then finally, modern finance with the establishment of the Bank of England, Bank of Amsterdam, fractional reserve banking. Soon thereafter, limited liability corporations. Actually, they still exist. They actually existed at the time, became more ubiquitous. Anyway, and those things were, can keep this is very important. The population of the Earth in 1700 was 625 million. Let that drop in. Population today is 8.5, heading for 10 or 11, probably. So we're already 12 times the number of people that we had just 325 years ago. That's unprecedentedly insane in human history. Second, the per capita consumption of energy and resources was a tenth to a twelfth of what our current world average, not even talking about the Americans, the Canadians, and the Australians, who are the gluttons of the world. Take the average of Botswana and Bangladesh and Dubai, right, and the United States. It's 10 to 12 times what it was then. So you multiply 12 times 12, you're basically at 144 times as intensively exploiting the world as we were then. So when you were in 1700, the power that came from this juxtaposition of these four elements was good in some sense. Good in that standards of living started to rise, nutrition got better, backbreaking labor was reduced. Now, on the flip side, the horrors of the early factories in London and in Manchester that are famously written about. But nonetheless, we got through all that, and you could objectively say that by the 20th century, human well-being was substantially increased, and the number of humans was hugely increased versus 1700. But the boundary conditions at which we started this trajectory are no longer true. When we were 144th as intense upon the Earth, we couldn't hurt the Earth, right? We didn't have internal combustion engines. We didn't have steam power, really, in 1700. And so we didn't have bulldozers. We didn't have dynamite. We didn't have all kinds of stuff. And so the amount of harm we could do, that we couldn't hurt Mother Nature too much, actually, no matter how rapacious we were. But because we'd fired up this engine that had no brakes, it has grown to fill the capacity, as you talked about earlier, the infinite growth, or exponential growth at least, in a finite planet comes to an end. But then other things have happened as well. And I think these are maybe even more important and more likely to bite us in the ass before the final climate calamity gets us. I put the climate calamity out there as, if the other ones don't get us, this one will, right? You count on that.
Yes, there's exponential risk from AI. Please keep
but one of the ones I think it's, again, to this cultural contradiction to capitalism, and the one I alluded to earlier, Bernays, the book by Bernays called Propaganda, in the 20s, that basically took the learnings of World War I propaganda and converted it into how to do public relations for business to program needs into the consumer. Once the game became corrupted, instead of fulfilling needs, it became to be actively involved in inventing needs. The game became potentially highly destructive of human culture and human nature. Walk into a Target or a large pharmacy in the United States, you'll see 200 varieties of shampoo. Does the world need 200 varieties of shampoo? Fuck no, right? These are invented abstractions with all kinds of weird branding, psychological warfare waged to make people feel wrong if they don't have the right shampoo. And shampoo becomes a status symbol. It's fucking insane, right? You go to the grocery store and there's 75 varieties of barbecue sauce, right? What the hell, right? And then you have really bad stuff like sports gambling on TV, basically. Hooking young men, typically, and usually lower status young men, on burning up 10% of their paychecks on football games. What the fuck, right? That's not something you would normally decide to do. Take 10% of your income and piss it away, right? Put it on the dinner table and light it on fire. But the market, it has as its charter today, post 1975 or 1980, if it works and it's profitable, you have a moral obligation to do it. You have a moral obligation to your shareholders to maximize shareholder value by whatever fuckery works, right? And that's where we are today. And so even if the climate thing doesn't clip us, maybe there are some technical saviors, might happen, might not. We're degrading our character and our ability to do collective sense making very rapidly. How the fuck do we elect Donald Trump as president of the United States or Boris Johnson, prime minister of England, right? Or UK, whatever the hell they call it, all them, y'all, you limeys, whatever the name you guys are going for these days. What the hell, right? That's a collapse of collective sense making, climate change denial, vaccine denial, right? Yes, there are some dodgy things about some of the arguments around climate change over extreme statements. There are certainly some questions you should have about vaccines, but broad-based vaccine denial, idiots, right? The record of vaccines is unbelievable. It's one of the reasons we have 8 billion people, because it used to be 1,700, 15% of kids died before they were 10. Now it's less than 1% worldwide. Our ability to, we probably reached the peak.
Wait. This is game A. So just to say, what you're saying is that this is game A.
Yes,
it started back in 1700, and it's now culminating in this deep corruption of our capacity to make sense, or our capacity to run an economic system, a system of production of material and informational things that is sustainable, that doesn't corrupt or corrode our planet and the living.
Right.
That's game A.
And game B is, wait a minute, this thing is going to end, right? And I will say, we compounded game B in 2012 and 2013, where a group of us came together over a period of 6 meetings and saw all this through. And we, I think, still all agree that game A is in its late stages. But to our earlier conversation about complex systems, well, that's tomorrow afternoon, and it could happen. I give you a scenario where it all starts falling apart tomorrow afternoon, or we're still staggering along 40 years from now. Either could happen. But we believe that we need a fundamental transition to a different basin of attraction. Think of a society as like a salad bowl with a marble in it, right? And the marble moves around as shit events happen. But if sometimes there's a big shock and the marble goes flying out of the bowl, and where does it land? And I wrote a paper a long time ago called "In Search of the Fifth Attractor," where I laid out that there are some existing attractors, and when the marble flies out of the bowl, whether it's climate, whether it's collapse of sense-making, whether it's the debt bubble that pops, whether it's AI risk, whether it's nuclear war, whether it's bio attacks, whether it's, COVID was not the big one, people. COVID had a death rate of 0.7% at most. There are definitely noetic viruses out there that could kill 40%, right? If they became evolved to be as virulent as COVID, or even worse, as virulent as measles, they could kill 40% of the population in a couple of years. That would fuck some shit up big time, right? So anyway.
So what's the first tell me the 5 attractors you're saying.
Okay.
One would be like dictatorship.
Okay, let me go down the list. This is important. Yeah. First is neo-fascism. China is the perfect example of neo-fascism. You go down the list of what is a fascist state, China is every one of them. Another one is neo-dark ages, Iran, essentially, or Christian nationalists of the more extreme variety in the United States. ISIS was a good example of a temporary neo-theocracy. Neo-feudalism. I think this is one's the highest risk in the United States. This would be Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen, Larry Ellison, people who believe that money power should just become absolutely entrenched with no recourse at all, right? And we build a feudal state where everybody is in submission to the guys that own all the money, right? And that one, we're on that road. It could happen, right? Then the fourth attractor is just disorder, collapse of the Western Empire, where population drops by 80%, where this is a great number, in 450 AD, right before the collapse, something like 60% of the urban population in Gaul, basically France today, were literate. Within 200 years, the king of France was illiterate, right? Whoops, right? That can happen. And that's the fourth. And so the fifth attractor is game B, which is, what is a coherent system that can be a global society, or at least a civilisational society, and that can endure for hundreds of years, which game A has, and is optimized instead of money on money return and all the crazy shit we talked about. Two things: raising human well-being while living safely within planetary limits. That's it. That's the only top level accord you have to have. And then you manifest down what is necessary to achieve that, and achieve it in different ways, right? Some group of people may want to live in mud huts like, hunter-gatherer people. Others may want to live in a well-designed, but as modern as you can make it way. Some people want to do in between. Some people may want to spend half the year in one, half the year in the other. I've done some modeling, some other people have too, and I've come around to the view that by 2080, we could build a sustainable energy source with the predictable gains in learning curve on existing technologies. Nothing magical has to happen, no fusion energy. And we could live on about a 4,000 watt society sustainably with about 10 billion people. To put that in comparison, the United States, Canada, and Australia are about 11,000 watt societies. Examples of a 4,000 watt societies: Portugal, not a bad place, right? Also, China today is at about a 4,000 watt society. India is about a 1,000 watt society. Sub-Saharan Africa is well below, like 300 or 400 watt society. And so if we're smart, which so far we've shown no signs of being, we could grow our energetic capacity. Of course, I'm using energy as a surrogate.
Yes, you know,
It means
proxy.
everything, all the materials, all the inputs, having closed system cycles to minimize the extraction necessary, et cetera. But a lot of the stuff's really not that limited. There's plenty of lithium, for instance. It's only an economic issue how much lithium we choose to mine. Rare earths, there's an asteroid so full of rare earths, it would last humanity 1 million years easily. So all the material constraints are aluminum instead of copper. They're probably all solvable. The big one is energy. And if we could put ourselves on a trajectory to reach 4 kilowatts for everybody on Earth, and this is part of the Game B ethos, is that everybody on Earth should get the 4 kilowatts, including Sub-Saharan Africa, including the United States, including Australia. And at the same time, the advanced countries build down while the poorer countries build up, and we all meet in the middle in a way that and at the same time, we change who we are as people, but not radically. I am always very resistant to social change that posits suddenly a new man, the socialist man turned into the communist fucking horror show, right? Or the German Volk, we are the people, the blood and the land, right? These kinds of total radical changes just don't work. But to get there, we do have to reprogram ourselves gradually, and we call this
gradually.
We call this, and let me remember, this is really key. The Game B, I think the one Game B insight that's absolutely sound is that one is this membrionics building up from the bottom of the cords. The second one is the personal institutional spiral. Let me explain that a little bit. Our institutions, as an economist would use the term, includes much more than just companies. It includes all the ways we work collectively together to accomplish things. And guess what? Those things are built of people. And the institutions you can build are dependent upon the people that you have, but reciprocally, the kind of people you have depend on the kind of institutions you have.
They form each other.
They form each other. This is a form of emergence, actually, where I call it reciprocal emergence. And in fact, I'm working on a paper on this. But
but that point is classic. I mean, in the structure often I talk, which I guess borrows, or you could say an inversion of Marx, is like there's culture, structures, and technologies, and then the surface layer. Classically in Marx, you have economics at the base layer and culture at the top, but these things interdepend, they intercause each other. Culture sets up institutions that then form being and form culture in some, as you say, co-creating process.
And culture is equivalent of our accords, basically. What is it that we agree it's called, Jordan Hall coined the expression strong sauce, that we all crave strong sauce and we aren't getting it from our current world. If we do get it, it's from cults or, bizarre religions or,
Yes.
what have you, or such. But we don't, the everyday culture in the West is certainly not strong sauce.
Is now weak because it's got an obsession with individualism, has an obsession with each person being able to do what they want, and strong accords are in tension with that to some extent. I like the way out, which is of vows, in the sense that many of us still today, at least, we hope, see the power of vows, for example, wedding vows, that in making those vows, in making a commitment to another, but it's voluntary commitment. I am giving up some freedom. I'm saying I'm not going to sleep with other people or whatever it is. But there's a power of those. But the point I'm saying is they are voluntary assented to, but strong source involves going beyond the somewhat, I would say, misunderstood ideas of narrow ideas of freedom. When I get married, in one sense, I lose freedom. It's true.
Yep.
I now can't date whoever I want, but I gain some deeper kind of freedom, or I don't like the word power, but there's something deeper that I get to participate in.
The trade works, right? And,
yes.
And again, this is a concept of accords, which takes in fact, we actually use married couples as a working experiment in some of our thinking, right? Because it's exactly as you say, we have an accord that we gain and we lose from, but net, most of us believe we win from, right? I'm still been married 44 years, but together with my wife 48 years. So,
but notice that it's declining. Notice that in the West, long-term monogamous commitment has been in decline.
Yep, for a long time, and that's bad.
And because of a commitment to an individualism, and I think this misunderstanding, this is where I say there's some deep cultural roots where when you say, I'm in so much agreement with you, and I think that one is that it is slow, but it's a cultural rebuilding, this understanding the value of strong source, the things that I gain in a collective when I make voluntary obligations. This is a great point. I mean, please continue. And so you're saying there's the accords. There's this point you were saying of the reciprocal emergence.
Yes, and this
of
is
institution, the person. Yeah,
and here's an insight we had relatively recently that currently the personal institutional spiral is operating in reverse. Our people are getting worse, and our institutions are getting worse. And the institutions are making our people worse. And so the spiral has been running down probably since 1965 or something like that. So the Game B ethos, one of the key components is we have to identify what it means to operate the cycle the opposite way, upwardly. And we have to do both simultaneously, personal change and new institutions. And you can't do too much of either at any one time. Because if the people, let's say people come in from game A and join a game B module, right? You can't force them to change too much, or force isn't the right word. They will not voluntarily choose to enter an accord that's too radically different, right? So we're not likely to go from a 12,000 watt American civilization to a 4,000 watt game B module immediately. It may be that we go from 12,000 to 8,000, right? And then we target 4,000 for 2050, and we actually achieve it in 2060. But we realize that all positive change is gradual, particularly in the human realm. People can change a lot. We look at all the different ways people have read the body of anthropology. People have lived all kinds of weird ways, but trying to make that move too fast seems to be a prescription for disaster. And the same is true institutionally. So the institutions have to be ones that people here can see, but aspire to, and see that are better than the institutions we have. And critically, that the new institutions, part of their design ethos is to help us be better people, so that we're better people and we can now build new institutions. And this thing spirals up with the people and the institutions both improving. And here's the little secret sauce. People say, these arrogant game B motherfuckers, they think a few thousand of them can change the world. And I go, well, when we get to a big enough number, people just come and see. All right. I expect game B communities to have some fair number of Airbnb slots available. Come spend a weekend. And do you like it better, or do you want to go back to cubicle hell? And
I have experienced it because we kind of did that at the beginning of Life Itself. We ran these gatherings for a week, and I thought that people were going to come, see what it would be like to live this way, and be like, we're going to change. There's one of the things I think about this. I'm from a Buddhist background with the term Sangha that people believe together. So I think there is a crucial thing about the time people. But I wanted to ask you a question before I get into that, which is say, I think it's more than people have to see; they have to live in it for a while.
And
But my
it
question,
has to be not just a while. It has to be a commitment to this is our culture and we will die for it.
yes,
It's not
yes,
just coming together. This is us. I mean, this is strong
yes,
fucking sauce, right? And that's just why I am not all that much on these gathering of the tribes and these retreats and the hippie
it has to
bullshit and
be.
all
It
that stuff.
has
It
to
has
be.
to be we commit. This is our life. Fuck you, right?
Right.
This is what we're
Come
doing.
join the come. The
Come join
question I
us or
got though,
don't. And this is
yeah,
what we're doing. Here's our accords. You don't like our accords? Don't join. Right? If you
that's
like
a
our accords but want a small adjustment, join and work with us, and we can
and
adjust
we'll
the
see
accord.
exactly. Well, I got one question, which is a small intellectual question. You were saying about this kind of basically the institution, the personal. I mean, I assume, of course, you're familiar with like integral or the left quadrant, right quadrant. I mean, that aspect of the inner and the outer in kind of dynamic interplay. Is that something that's ever influenced your thinking? You're like, yeah, what influence or not? It's something I often ask this because many people have had some influence through the integral journey or not. Yeah, has that ever played any influence on your thinking, or how did that? When did you become aware of
Indirectly,
that?
indirectly. I never was involved in Integral at all,
Yes,
though I would say many of the Game B people were. A large
yes,
number have had Integral exposure and have moved away for various reasons.
yes.
I did read Ken Wilber's book. Was it called? I don't remember what it was called. Brief History of Everything or something like that.
Right, right. Yeah, one of the
And,
summary ones. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
It's got the appendix by the person who wrote The Matrix. Yeah,
yeah, and I read it late in the day. Just okay, what the hell are these people talking about? I sort of had a rough gestalt of what they meant, and I read it, and I go, all right, some of this stuff's nutty, but the four quadrants is more or less useful. And
yes,
as people listen to my podcast know, my favorite word is useful. Right? I don't believe any. I don't believe in foundationalism. I believe that we are cast in the middle between the Planck length and cosmology. And it's our job to just do something interesting and evolving and complexifying and good here in the middle without any firm foundations. And so when people try to build foundations, I'm suspicious. I'm also no great fan of these color thingies. In fact,
the spiral dynamics. You mean kind of the
with
green out? What
yeah,
out? What stage people? I mean, it's a cultural paradigmatic framework. I mean, we use that. I would say I think it's sometimes um, one's got to be careful of shorthand, but I don't think the academic base for that is very strong, but I think this idea that there are people are in kind of cultural paradigmatic worldviews, or you would say different accords. So even game A and game B, you could see a version of this. It's difficult to explain game B to someone within game A, I imagine, if you've had the experience of trying to do that.
it was a lot harder in 2012 than it is now. Uh,
Yes.
we steal this from St. Paul, right? The aluminum siding salesman of Christianity, right? Which is the number of ears to hear is growing exponentially. It doesn't take much explaining to paint the picture that game A is in its end game, right?
Yes. It's got a lot
And
easier.
and talking about strong sauce versus weak sauce, people have been saturated with weak sauce, particularly younger people, right? The game B was crafted by, this is interesting, half millennials, half boomers, and a token, no, half boomers, half Xers, and a token millennial. Today, the center of game B people is the middle of millennial, basically. And it's young people that see this and feel this and are starting to live this in a far more visceral ways than the crew that designed this, which frankly, we did it more or less intellectually. We were left brain thinkers in the main. But the younger folks are bringing a right brain perspective and a left brain perspective, which is really what's going to be necessary to make this thing happen. Some of the work of Ian McGilchrist, for instance, he's not a official Game B thinker, but he's somebody that a lot of people in the Game B world have studied and listened to and thought
Yes.
about. And we think that that's going to certainly a key part of what's going on. So yeah, it's, back to I just have to tell this one story. I
Yeah,
just enjoy it.
please.
When I first started hearing about this, spiral dynamics and colors and all this shit, I created something that I posted online, which was instead of a spiral up, I put an arch, kind of like the
The
McDonald's
rainbow.
arch. I made an arch, and I put the colors in the same order. And at the top, I had orange, and then to the left, I had stupider, and to the right, I had goofier, basically. So if you're going down to red, it was goofier. If you're going to green, no, red was stupider, to green was and teal, and it was goofier. And I sort of stand by that. And I look at those things. I say, I can see myself. I'm a bit of teal. I'm a bit of aquamarine. I'm a bit of green. I'm a bit of red. But I'm more orange than anything else, right?
Yes.
I believe in reality. I believe in engineering. I believe in just fucking reality, right?
Yes.
And trying to put me into one of them boxes, I don't like it at all. So that.
Oh, but just be clear, there's that candy. You can, I don't know if you ever got it in the US, but in England you could get it, which was like a candy that it's circular, and then it was different colors.
Oh yeah, the little jawbreaker. Yeah.
And I think of the colors like that. There's no suggestion that any one person is one color in their worldview. We have different elements like the jawbreakers, but you just said it, there's a center of gravity. Now, again, I just want to emphasize, I'm not a big fan of that. I find it a useful maybe storytelling, or kind of it's like a model is a crude model that's useful for thinking at least about the fact that there are these different worldview kind of positions. And you're saying you're a center of gravity, but I think that's a lovely story. But I love what you're saying at the end, which is that there's a shift going on, and you see the future the Game B future emerging. And what maybe to end is like, what did you see of the, Game B, you said like was 2012 was formally you were formally developed, or formally, but this was a moment you spent time in this meeting. How has it evolved over the last 10 or 13 years? What any lessons from the evolution, the development of the Game B community over the last now 13 years?
Yeah, it's very interesting because there is no official Game B anything, right? There is no organization, right? No website. There's a Facebook group, which got 3,500 people on it. There's a private online group which has a similar number. There's maybe 10,000 people on Twitter who consider themselves Game B. And so it's very interesting. Just a cloud of people who have different points of view, by the way, right? No, this is the Rutt view that you've heard today, somewhat different views from some other people. But it's kind of just expanded, and it's an amazing number of people I run into who sort of are at least vaguely aware of the Game B idea. It probably has more currency than any of the other liminal web things, even though it's the least well articulated. And we think that's kind of cool and interesting and such. No, I will say I am writing with a great co-author a Game B book, which will at least put one crystallization point down with some play calling of what we suggest are some next steps to actually what I call the origin event. Instead of thinking and talking and doing a little bit of doing, is it now time to do? And because of Game B being no structure, the only way that happens is if people rally to it, right? There's no way to make Game B happen. All they can do is set some ideas out that might lead to it beginning to actually happen. And this is really the key thread of the book. How do you get from the idea to societal flip in 60 years, and in a way that's at least plausible enough for people to some small number of people, a few thousand probably initially, choose to start doing it. And will it grow exponentially? Will it be like the invention of life, or an alternative form of life? One of the very interesting and humbling things is to realize that you, me, and a yeast are all related. We're all descendant from Luca, the last universal common ancestor. Further, our parents have never failed to reproduce for 3.5 billion years, or we wouldn't be here. And there's a huge amount of space that could have been, but wasn't, due to the vagaries of who lived and who died and who evolved. But life has come a long way. And you can think of Game A, and if you think of proto-Game A going all the way back to agriculture, we're trying to establish a new thing that's as vital as Luca life, that will outcompete Game A and its predecessors over time, but it won't happen immediately. And can we actually figure out an ignition event equivalent to whatever happened with Luca that can organically develop and grow and split and mutate and change, and through coherent pluralism, where the different membranes may be quite different, even at the same level. They can even have diametrically opposed views about various things, so long as they're in coherence on the overarching goal of improving human well-being within safe planetary limits. And yeah, this is it's crazy, it's audacious, but at least some of us think the time has come to give it a roll.
Well, I think that's amazing, Jim. I think that's a great moment to end on. Thank you so much. Is there any last words you want to leave the listeners with when we end today?
This is one thing I just, especially talking to younger folks, don't despair. Despair is the killer, right? Courage is the essential virtue. Without courage, no other virtue is possible. We may fail, but we should not fail because we will not try, because we're in despair. Fuck despair. Get the fuck out of your bed, take your phone, throw it in the lake, and get out there and just do something. Because if you do nothing, then the bad will happen. If you do something, there's at least some reasonable chance that we will prevail.
Amen. A real agreement to that. Thank you so much, Jim.